So, you want me to read you the back of the book? Nah. Let's put the glasses on and get right into it. Feel free. I'm not going to give you the whole background of bell hooks. Last time we did a book stream, I did that. I started the stream with a little bit of like Wikipedia background on why you should know bell hooks and her importance. You can do that research on your own. I'm not going to hammer that into the ground. And I think like the text is probably like the most important thing we're here to check out. So we might as well um, put the glasses on. Stop talking. Just start reading. All right, y'all. Here we go. Al- Alchemically transforming lead into true gold, men are given the opportunity to burn, to be touched by an inner fire, to live a life of substance, to be changed utterly. This book is dedicated to the memory of my grandfather, Gus Oldham, burning a heart on fire whose love, stronger than death, illuminates. Here's a quote from Harriet Lerner. In our rapidly changing society, we can count on only two things that will never change. What will never change is the will to change and the fear of change. It is the will to change that motivates us to seek help. It is the fear of change that motivates us to resist the very help we seek. Preface. About Men. When Phyllis Chesler's book About Men was first published more than 10 years ago, I was excited. At last, I thought then, a feminist thinker will explain this mystery, men. Back then, I had never shared with anyone the feelings I had about men. I had not been able to confess that not only did I not understand men, I feared them. Chesler, with her usual take no prisoners daring, I was certain, would not simply name this fear, explain it. She would do much more. She would make men real to me. Men would become people I could talk to, work with, love. Her book was disappointing. Filled with quotes from numerous sources, newspaper clippings of male violence, it offered bits and pieces of information. There was little or no explanation, no interpretation. From that time on, I began to think that women were afraid to speak openly about men, afraid to explore deeply our connections to them, what we have witnessed as daughters, sisters, grandmothers, mothers, aunts, lovers, occasional sex objects, and afraid even to acknowledge our ignorance, how much we really do not know about men. All that we do not know intensifies our sense of fear and threat, and certainly to know men only in relation to male violence, to the violence inflicted upon women and children, is a partial, inadequate knowing. Thanks for the topic change. I didn't know there was a topic change for this. Nowadays, I am amazed that women who advocate feminist politics have had so little to say about men and masculinity. Within the early writings of radical feminism, anger, rage, and even hatred of men was voiced, yet there was no meaningful attempt to offer ways to resolve these feelings, to imagine a culture of reconciliation where women and men might meet and find common ground. Militant feminism gave women permission to unleash their rage and hatred at men, but it did not allow us to talk about what it meant to love men in patriarchal culture, to know how we could express that love without fear of exploitation and oppression. Before her death, Barbara Deming was among those rare outspoken feminist thinkers who wanted to create a space for women to talk openly about our feelings about men, articulating her concern that the wellspring of female fury at men was making it impossible for women to express any other feelings than their sense that, quote, men are hopeless. She stated, quote, it scares me that more and more women are coming to feel this way, to feel that men as an entire gender are hopeless. Deming did not feel that men were incapable of change, of moving away from male domination, but she did feel that it was necessary for women to speak the truth about how we think about men. Quote, I believe that the only way we can get where we have to go is by never refusing to face the truth of our feelings as they rise up in us, even when we wish it were not the truth. So we have to admit to the truth that we sometimes wish our own fathers, sons, brothers, lovers were not there. But this truth exists alongside another truth, the truth that this wish causes us anguish. While some women active in the feminist movement felt anguished about our collective inability to convert masses of men to feminist thinking, many women simply felt that feminism gave them permission to be indifferent to men, to turn away from male needs. When contemporary feminism was at its most intense, many women insisted that they were weary of giving energy to men, that they wanted to place women at the center of all feminist discussions. Feminist thinkers like myself who wanted to include men in the discussion were usually labeled male-identified and dismissed. We were, quote, sleeping with the enemy. We were the feminists who could not be trusted because we cared about the fate of men. We were the feminists who did not believe in female superiority any more than we believed in male superiority. As the feminist movement progressed, the fact became evident that sexism and sexist exploitation and oppression would not change unless men were also deeply engaged in feminist resistance. Yet most women were still expressing no genuine interest in highlighting discussions of maleness. And I'm gonna read that twice because when I remember reading that and going like, oh yeah, like that will have to be necessary, won't it? As the feminist movement progressed, the fact became evident that sexism and sexist exploitation and oppression would not change unless men were also deeply engaged in feminist resistance. Yet most women were still expressing no genuine interest in highlighting discussions of maleness. Acknowledging that there needed to be more feminist focus on men did not lead to the production of a body of writing by women about men. The lack of such writing intensifies my sense that women cannot fully talk about men because we have been so well socialized in patriarchal culture to be silent on the subject of men. But more than silenced, we have been socialized to be the keepers of grave and serious secrets, especially those that could reveal the everyday strategies of male domination, how male power is enacted and maintained in our private lives. Indeed, even the radical feminist labeling of all men as oppressors and all women as victims was a way to deflect attention away from the reality of men and our ignorance about them. To simply label them as oppressors and dismiss them meant we never had to give voice to the gaps in our understanding or to talk about maleness in complex ways. We did not have to talk about the ways our fear of men distorted our perspectives and blocked our understanding. Hating men was just another way to not take men and masculinity seriously. It was simply easier for feminist women to talk about challenging and changing patriarchy than it was for us to talk about men, what we knew and did not know about the ways we wanted men to change. Better to just express our desire to have men disappear, to see them dead and gone. Eloquently, Barbara Deming expresses this longing when she writes about her father's death. Years ago now, quote, years ago now, it was on a weekend in the country, and he'd been working outside with a pick and a shovel, making a new garden plot. He'd had a heart attack and fallen there in the loose dirt. We'd called a rescue squad, and they were trying to bring him back to life, but couldn't. I was half lying on the ground next to him, with my arms around his body. I realized that this was the first time in my life that I had felt able to really touch my father's body. I was holding hard to it with my love and with my grief, and my grief was partly that my father, whom I loved, was dying, but it was also that I knew already that his death would allow me to feel freer. I was mourning that this had to be so. It's a grief that is hard for me to speak of. That's the only time I would feel free to touch him without feeling threatened by his power over me, was when he lay dead. It's unbearable to me, and I think there can hardly be a woman who hasn't felt a comparable grief. So it's an oversimplification to speak the truth that we sometimes wish men dead, unless we also speak the truth, which is perhaps even harder to face, as we try to find our own powers to be our own women, the truth that this wish is unbearable to us. It rends us. Unquote. As a young woman in my 20s who had not yet found her own powers, I often wished the men in my life would die. My longing for my father's death began in childhood. It was the way I responded to his rage, his violence. I used to dream him gone, dead and gone. Death was the way out of the fear evoked by the proclamation, quote, wait until your father comes home. The threat of punishment was so intense, his power over us so real. Lying in my girlhood bed waiting to hear the hard anger in his voice, the invasive sound of his commands, I used to think, if only he would die, we could live. Later, as a grown woman waiting for the man in my life to come home, the man who was more often than not a caring partner, but who sometimes erupted into violent fits of rage, I used to think, quote, maybe he will have an accident and die. Maybe he will not come home and I will be free and able to live. Women and children all over the world want men to die so that they can live. This is the most painful truth of male domination, that men wield patriarchal power in daily life in ways that are awesomely life-threatening, that women and children cower in fear in various states of powerlessness, believing that the only way out of their suffering, their only hope, is for men to die, for the patriarchal father not to come home. Women and female and male children, dominated by men, have wanted them dead because they believe that these men are not willing to change. They believe that men who are not dominators will not protect them. One more time. They believe that men who are not dominators will not protect them. They believe that men are hopeless. When I left home and went away to college, if I called home and my father answered, I hung up. I had nothing to say to him. I had no words to communicate to the dad who did not listen, who did not seem to care, who did not speak words of tenderness or love. I had no need for the patriarchal dad, and feminism had taught me that I could forget about him, turn away from him. In turning away from my dad, I turned away from a part of myself. It is a fiction of false feminism that we women can find our power in a world without men, in a world where we deny our connections to men. We claim our power fully only when we can speak the truth that we need men in our lives, that men are in our lives whether we want them to be or not, that we need men to challenge patriarchy, that we need men to change. While feminist thinking enabled me to reach beyond the boundaries set by patriarchy, it was the search for wholeness, for self recovery, that led me back to my dad. My reconciliation with my father began with my recognition that I wanted and needed his love, and that if I could not have his love, then at least I needed to heal the wound in my heart his violence had created. I needed to talk with him, to tell him my truth, to hold him close and let him know he mattered. Nowadays, when I call home, I revel in the sound of my father's voice, his southern speech familiar and broken in all the right places. I want to hear his voice forever. I do not want him to die, this dad whom I can hold in my arms, who receives my love and loves me back. Understanding him, I understand myself better. To claim my power as a woman, I have to claim him. We belong together. The will to change men, masculinity, and love is about our need to live in a world where women and men can belong together. Looking at the reasons patriarchy has maintained its power over men in their lives, I urge us to reclaim feminism for men, showing why feminist thinking and practice are the only way we can truly address the crisis of masculinity today. In these chapters, I repeat many points so that each chapter alone will convey the most significant ideas of the whole. Men cannot change if there are no blueprints for change. Men cannot love if they are not taught the art of loving. It is not true that men are unwilling to change. It is true that many men are afraid to change. It is true that masses of men have not even begun to look at the ways that patriarchy keeps them from knowing themselves, from being in touch with their feelings, from loving. To know love, men must be able to let go the will to dominate. They must be able to choose life over death. They must be willing to change. There it is. There's the preface. Chat got slow. I assume folks are listening. Feel free to comment, though, as I read. Like, I'll stop kind of at the end of chapters and, like, check out comments. You won't be derailing or anything. I'm going to take a little drink, and then we'll get into chapter 1. Ono's given me a content warning. Whoa, I forgot the mouse was attached to my eyes. Ono gave me a content warning. I believe it was for chapter 4. Let me just check out the chapter titles and I'll try and, like, before we get too deep into any, like, deeply triggering material, I'll try and give a warning. I think so. Chapter 4 is called Stopping Male Violence. So when we get there, we'll throw a little content warning up. Hydrate. Okay. All right. This first sentence is going to hit you wrong, but all right. Let me get the let me get the year. Let's qualify this. Let's figure it out. I'm bad at figuring out the year. Someone can tell me what year this was published. We're okay. We're with bell hooks now. Sometimes we might get challenging sentences, but it's going to turn around, okay? So I looked down and I saw every female wants to be loved by a male. And honestly, I was like, whoa, Belle, what are we doing? But then I read a little more. Okay. Every female wants to be loved by a male. Every woman wants to love and be loved by the males in her life. Whether gay or straight, bisexual or celibate, she wants to feel the love of father, grandfather, uncle, brother, or male friend. I'll buy it. If she is heterosexual, she wants the love of a male partner. If we live in a culture where emotionally starved, deprived females are desperately seeking male love. Our collective hunger is so intense it rends us, and yet we dare not speak it for fear we will be mocked, pitied, shamed. To speak our hunger for male love would demand that we name the intensity of our lack and our loss. The male bashing that was so intense when contemporary feminism first surfaced more than 30 years ago was in part the rageful cover-up of the shame women felt, not because men refused to share their power, but because we could not seduce, cajole, or entice men to share their emotions, to love us. By claiming that we wanted the power men had, man-hating feminists, who were by no means the majority, covertly proclaimed that they too wanted to be rewarded for being out of touch with their feelings, for being unable to love. Men in patriarchal culture responded to feminist demand for greater equity in the work world and in the sexual world by making room, by sharing the spheres of power. The place where most men refused to change, believed themselves unable to change, was in their emotional lives. Not even for the love and respect of liberated women were men willing to come to the table of love as equal partners ready to share the feast. No one hungers for male love more than the little girl or boy who rightfully needs and seeks love from dad. He may be absent, dead, present in body yet emotionally not there, but the girl or boy hungers to be acknowledged, recognized, respected, cared for. All around our nation, a billboard carries the message, quote, each night millions of kids go to sleep starving for attention from their dads. Because patriarchal culture has already taught girls and boys that dad's love is more valuable than mother's love, it is unlikely that maternal affection will heal the lack of fatherly love. No wonder then that these girls and boys grow up angry with men, angry that they have been denied the love they need to feel whole, worthy, or accepted. Heterosexual girls and homosexual boys can and do become the women and men who make romantic bonds the place where they quest to find and know male love. But that quest is rarely satisfied. Sorry, I just became aware the Minecraft music is playing, and I'm not entirely sure that's the best. I don't know if you can hear that, but I can hear Minecraft music. While the Minecraft music is good, I just don't know. I don't know if Mojang would sign off on this. All right. How we doing, chat? All right. But that quest is rarely satisfied. Usually rage, grief, and unrelenting disappointment lead women and men to close off the part of themselves that was hoping to be touched and healed by male love. They learn then to settle for whatever positive attention men are able to give. They learn to overvalue it. They learn to pretend that it is love. They learn how not to speak the truth about men and love. They learn to live the lie. As a child, I hungered for the love of my dad. I wanted him to notice me, to give me his attention and his affections. When I could not get him to notice me by being good and dutiful, I was willing to risk punishment to be bad enough to catch his gaze, to hold it and to bear the weight of his heavy hand. I longed for those hands to hold, shelter, and protect me, to touch me with tenderness and care, but I accepted that this would never be. I knew at age 5 that those hands would acknowledge me only when they were bringing me pain, that if I could accept that pain and hold it close, I could be Daddy's girl. I could make him proud. I am not alone. So many of us have felt that we could win male love by showing we were willing to bear the pain, that we were willing to live our lives affirming that the maleness deemed truly manly, because it withholds, withdraws, refuses, is the maleness we desire. We learn to love men more because they will not love us. If they dared to love us, in patriarchal culture, they would cease to be real men. In her moving memoir, In the Country of Men, Jan Waldron describes a similar longing. She confesses that, quote, the kind of father I ached for I have never seen except in glimpses I have embellished with wishful imaginings. Contrasting the loving fathers we long for with the fathers we have, she expresses the hunger. This is from her book. Dad, it is a vow against all odds in the face of countless examples to the contrary. Dad, it does not have the utilitarian effect of mum or mom. Ma. It's still spoken as a ballad refrain. It's a pledge that originates in the heart and fights for life amid the carnage of persistent, obvious history to the contrary and excruciatingly scant follow-through. Mother love is aplenty and apparent. We complain because we have too much of it. The love of a father is an uncommon gem to be hunted, burnished, and hoarded. The value goes up because of its scarcity. In our culture, we say very little about the longing for father love. Rather than bringing us great wisdom about the nature of men in love, reformist feminist focus on male power reinforced the notion that somehow males were powerful and had it all. Feminist writing did not tell us about the deep inner misery of men. It did not tell us the terrible terror that gnaws at the soul when one cannot love. Women who envied men their hard-heartedness were not about to tell us the depth of male suffering. And so it has taken more than 30 years for the voices of visionary feminists to be heard telling the world and the truth about men and love. Barbara Deming hinted at those truths from her book. I think the reason that men are so very violent is that they know deep in themselves that they're acting out a lie, and so they're furious at being caught up in the lie, but they don't know how to break it. They're in a rage because they are acting out a lie, which means that in some deep part of themselves they want to be delivered from it, are homesick for the truth. The truth we do not tell is that men are longing for love. This is the longing feminist thinkers must dare to examine, explore, and talk about. Those rare visionary feminist seers, who are now no longer all female, are no longer afraid to openly address issues of men, masculinity, and love. Women have been joined by men with open minds and big hearts, men who love, men who know how hard it is for males to practice the art of loving in patriarchal culture. In part, I began to write books about love because of the constant fighting between my ex-boyfriend Anthony and myself. We were, and at the time of this writing still are, each other's primary bond. We came together hoping to create love and found ourselves creating conflict. We decided to break up, but even that did not bring an end to the conflict. The issues we fought about most had to do with the practice of love. Like so many men who know that the women in their lives want to hear them declare love, Anthony made those declarations. When asked to link the I love you words with definition and practice, he found that he did not really have the words, that he was fundamentally uncomfortable being asked to talk about emotions. Like many males, he had not been happy in most of the relationships he had chosen. The unhappiness of men in relationships, the grief men feel about the failure of love, often goes unnoticed in our society precisely because the patriarchal culture really does not care if men are unhappy. When females are in emotional pain, the sexist thinking that says that emotions should and can matter to women makes it possible for most of us to at least voice our heart, to speak it to someone, whether a close friend, a therapist, or the stranger sitting next to us on a plane or bus. Patriarchal mores teach a form of emotional stoicism to men that says they are more manly if they do not feel, but if by chance they should feel and the feelings hurt, the manly response is to stuff them down, to forget about them, to hope they go away. George Weinberg explains in Why Men Won't Commit. Most men are on a quest for the ready-made perfect woman because they basically feel that problems in a relationship can't be worked out. When the slightest thing goes wrong, it seems easier to bolt than talk. The masculine pretense is that real men feel no pain. The reality is that men are hurting and that the whole culture responds to them by saying, please do not tell us what you feel. I have always been a fan of the Sylvia cartoon where two women sit, one looking into a crystal ball as the other woman says, he never talks about his feelings, and the woman who can see the future says, at 2 p.m. all over the world, men will begin to talk about their feelings, and women all over the world will be sorry. Drink. If we cannot heal what we cannot feel, by supporting patriarchal culture that socializes men to deny feelings, we doom them to live in states of emotional numbness. We construct a culture where male pain can have no voice, where male hurt cannot be named or healed. It is not just men who do not take their pain seriously. Most women do not want to deal with male pain if it interferes with the satisfaction of female desire. When feminist movement led to men's liberation, including male exploration of feelings, some women mocked male emotional expression with the same disgust and contempt as sexist men. Despite all the expressed feminist longing for men of feeling, when men worked to get in touch with feelings, no one really wanted to reward them. In feminist circles, men who wanted to change were often labeled narcissistic or needy. Individual men who expressed feelings were often seen as attention seekers, patriarchal manipulators trying to steal the stage with their drama. When I was in my 20s, I would go to couples therapy, and my partner of more than 10 years would explain how I asked him to talk about his feelings, and when he did, I would freak out. He was right. It was hard for me to face that I did not want to hear about his feelings when they were painful or negative, that I did not want my image of the strong man truly challenged by learning of his weakness and vulnerabilities. Here I was, an enlightened feminist woman who did not want to hear my man speak his pain because it revealed his emotional vulnerability. It stands to reason, then, that the masses of women... Balmer, thank you for the sub.
I never heard anybody call it that.
15 months. I thought it was spaghetti. Thanks, Balmer. Welcome, man. Reading bell hooks. Balmer, you made me lose my place. Great job, Balmer, with your Twitch sub, giving me money, distracting me while I'm reading. Nobody sub. Nobody else ever sub again. Lemmy got fucking... I watched Lemmy get 100 gift subs today. Like $2,000 of gift subs. Thank you for the sub, Bomber. Here I was, an enlightened feminist woman who did not want to hear my man speak his pain because it revealed his emotional vulnerability. It stands to reason, then, that the masses of women committed to the sexist principle that men who express their feelings are weak really do not want to hear men speak, especially if what they say is that they hurt, that they feel unloved. Many women cannot hear male pain about love because it sounds like an indictment of female failure. Since sexist norms have taught us that loving is our task, whether in our role as mothers or lovers or friends, if men say they are not loved, then we are at fault. We are to blame. There is only one emotion that patriarchy values when expressed by men. That emotion is anger. Real men get mad, and their madness, no matter how violent or violating, is deemed natural, a positive expression of patriarchal masculinity. Anger is the best hiding place for anybody seeking to conceal pain or anguish of spirit. My father was an angry man. At times he still is, even though he is past 80 years old. Recently, when I called home, he said, speaking of me and my sister, I love you both dearly. Amazed to hear Dad speak of love, I wanted us to talk, but I could not find words. Fear silenced me, the old fear of Dad the patriarch, the silent, angry man, and the new fear of breaking this fragile bond of caring connection. So I could not ask, what do you mean, Dad, when you tell me that you love me dearly? In the chapter focusing on our search for loving men in Communion, the Female Search for Love, that's the book title, Communion, the Female Search for Love, I make this observation. Lots of women fear men, and fear can lay the foundation for contempt and hatred. It can be a cover-up for repressed, killing rage. Fear keeps us away from love, and yet women rarely talk to men about how much we fear them. My siblings and I have never talked with Dad about the years he held us hostage, imprisoning us behind the walls of his patriarchal terrorism. And even in our adult years, we are still afraid to ask him, why, Daddy? Why were you always so angry? Why didn't you love us? In those powerful passages where she writes of her father's death, Barbara Deming names that fear. As death is swiftly taking him beyond her reach, she sees clearly that fear had kept him away from her all along. His fear of her being too close and her fear of seeking to be close to him. Fear keeps us from being close to the men in our lives. It keeps us from love. Once upon a time, I thought it was a female thing, this fear of men. Yet when I began to talk with men about love, time and time again, I heard stories of male fear of other males. Indeed, men who feel, who love, often hide their emotional awareness from other men for fear of being attacked and shamed. This is the big secret we all keep together, the fear of patriarchal maleness that binds everyone in our culture. We cannot love what we fear. That is why so many religious traditions teach us that there is no fear in love. We struggle then in patriarchal culture, all of us, to love men. We may care about males deeply, we may cherish our connections with the men in our lives, and we may desperately feel that we cannot live without their presence, their company. We can feel all these passions in the face of maleness and yet stand removed, keeping the distance patriarchy has created, maintaining the boundaries we are told not to cross. In a class with students who are reading the trilogy of books I have written about love, with 40 men talking about love, we talk of fathers. A black male in his late 30s, whose father was present in the home, a hard worker, talked about his recent experience of parenthood, his commitment to be a loving father, and his fear that he will fail. He fears failure because he has not had a loving role model. His father was almost always away from home, working, roaming. When he was home, his favorite way of relating was to tease and taunt his son mercilessly in a biting voice full of sarcasm and contempt, a voice that could humiliate with just a word. Reflecting the experience of many of us, the individual telling his story talked about wanting the love of this hard man, but then learning not to want it, learning to silence his heart, to make it not matter. I asked him and the other men present, if you have closed off your heart, shut down your emotional awareness, then do you know how to love your sons? Where and when along the way did you learn the practice of love? He tells me and the other men who sit in our circle of love, I just think of what my father would do and do the opposite. On the real, that's what I do. That's my shit. That's real. Everyone laughs. I affirm this practice, adding only that it is not enough to stay in the space of reaction, that being simply reactive is always to risk allowing that shadowy past to overtake the present. How many sons, fleeing the example of their fathers, raise boys who emerge as clones of their grandfathers, boys who may never even have met their grandfathers but behave just like them? Beyond reaction, though, any male, no matter his past or present circumstance, no matter his age or experience, can learn how to love. In the past 4 years, the one clear truth I have learned from individual men I have met while traveling and lecturing is that men want to know love, and they want to know how to love. There is simply not enough literature speaking directly, intimately to this need. After writing a general book about love, then one specifically about black people in love, then another focusing on the female search for love, I wanted to go further and talk about men and love. Women and men alike in our culture spend very little time encouraging males to learn to love. Even the women who are pissed off at men, women most of whom are not and maybe never will be feminist, use their anger to avoid being truly committed to helping to create any world where males of all ages can know love. And there remains a small strain of feminist thinkers who feel strongly that they have given all they want to give to men. They are concerned solely with improving the collective welfare of women. Yet life has shown me that any time a single male dares to transgress patriarchal boundaries in order to love, the lives of women, men, and children are fundamentally changed for the better. Every day on our television screens and in our nation's newspapers, we are brought news of continued male violence at home and all around the world. When we hear that teenage boys are arming themselves and killing their parents, their peers, or strangers, a sense of alarm permeates our culture. Folks want to have answers. They want to know, why is this happening? Why so much killing by boy children now and in this historical moment? Yet no one talks about the role patriarchal notions of manhood play in teaching boys that it is their nature to kill, then teaching them that they can do nothing to change this nature, nothing, that is, that will leave their masculinity intact. As our culture prepares males to embrace war, they must be all the more indoctrinated into patriarchal thinking that tells them that it is their nature to kill and to enjoy killing. Bombarded by news about male violence, we hear no news about men and love. Only a revolution of values in our nation will end male violence, and that revolution will necessarily be based on a love ethic. To create loving men, we must love males. Loving maleness is different from praising and rewarding males for living up to sexist defined notions of male identity. Caring about men because of what they do for us is not the same as loving males for simply being. When we love maleness, we extend our love whether males are performing or not. Performance is different from simply being. In patriarchal culture, males are not allowed simply to be who they are and to glory in their unique identity. Their value is always determined by what they do. In an anti patriarchal culture, males do not have to prove their value and worth. They know from birth that simply being gives them value, the right to be cherished and loved. I write about men and love as a declaration of profound gratitude to the males in my life with whom I do the work of love. Much of my thinking about maleness began in childhood when I witnessed the differences in the ways my brother and I were treated. The standards used to judge his behavior were much harsher. No male successfully measures up to patriarchal standards without engaging in an ongoing practice of self betrayal. In his boyhood, my brother, like so many boys, just longed to express himself. He did not want to conform to a rigid script of appropriate maleness. As a consequence, he was scorned and ridiculed by our patriarchal dad. In his younger years, our brother was a loving presence in our household, capable of expressing emotions of wonder and delight. As patriarchal thinking and action claimed him in adolescence, he learned to mask his loving feelings. He entered that space of alienation and antisocial behavior deemed, quote, natural for adolescent boys. His 6 sisters witnessed the change in him and mourned the loss of our connection. The damage done to his self-esteem in boyhood has lingered throughout his life, for he continues to grapple with the issue of whether he will define himself or allow himself to be defined by patriarchal standards. At the same time that my brother surrendered his emotional awareness and his capacity to make emotional connection in order to be accepted as, quote, one of the boys, rejecting the company of his sisters for fear that enjoying us made him less male, my mother's father, Daddy Gus, found it easier to be disloyal to patriarchy in old age. He was the man in my childhood who practiced the art of loving. He was emotionally aware and emotionally present, and yet he was also trapped by a patriarchal bond. Our grandmother, his wife of more than 60 years, was always deeply invested in the dominator model of relationships. To macho man, to macho man, to macho men, Daddy Gus, Mama's father, appeared to be less than masculine. He was seen as henpecked. I can remember our patriarchal father expressing contempt for Daddy Gus, calling him weak and letting Mama know via domination that he would not be ruled by a woman. Dad took Mama's admiration for her dad, for his capacity to love, and made it appear that what was precious to her was really worthless. Back then, Mama did not know how lucky she was to have a loving father. Like so many females, she had been seduced by myths of romantic love to dream of a strong, domineering, take control, dashing, and daring man as a suitable mate. She married her ideal only to find herself trapped in a bond with a punishing, cruel, unloving, patriarchal man. She spent more than 40 years of marriage believing in the patriarchal gender roles that told her he should be the one in control and that she should be the one to submit and obey. When patriarchal men are not cruel, the women in their lives can cling to the seductive myth that they are lucky to have a real man, a benevolent patriarch who provides and protects. When that real man is repeatedly cruel, when he responds to care and kindness with contempt and brutal disregard, the woman in his life begins to see him differently. She may begin to interrogate her own allegiance to patriarchal thinking. She may wake up and recognize that she is wedded to abuse, that she is not loved. That moment of awakening and the moment of is the moment of heartbreak. Heartbroken women in long-time marriages or partnerships rarely leave their men. They learn to make an identity out of their suffering, their complaint, their bitterness. Throughout our childhood, Mama was the great defender of Dad. He was her knight in shining armor, her beloved, and even when she began to see him, to really see him as he was and not as she had longed for him to be, she still taught us to admire him and be grateful for his presence, his material provision, his discipline. A 50s woman, she was willing to cling to the fantasy of the patriarchal ideal, even as she confronted the brutal reality of patriarchal domination daily. As her children left home, leaving her alone with her husband, her hope that they might find their way to love was soon dashed. She was left face to face with the emotionally shut down, cold patriarch she had married. After 50 years of marriage, she would not be leaving him, but she would no longer believe in love. Only her bitterness found a voice. She now speaks the absence of love, a lifetime of heartache. She is not alone. All over the world, women live with men in states of lovelessness. They live and they mourn. My father and mother, my mother and father, were the source figures who shaped my patterns of love and longing. I spent most of the years between 20 and 40 seeking to know love with intellectually brilliant men who were simply emotionally unaware, men who could not give what they did not have, men who could not teach what they did not know, men who did not know how to love. In my 40s, I began a relationship with a much younger man who had been schooled in the art and practice of feminist thinking. He was able to acknowledge having a broken spirit. As a child, he had been a victim of patriarchal tyranny. He knew there was something wrong within, even though he had not yet found a language to articulate what was missing. Something missing within, quote unquote, was a self-description I heard from many men as I went around our nation talking about love. Again and again, a man would tell me about early childhood feelings of emotional exuberance, of unexpressed joy, of feeling connected to life and to other people, and then a rupture happened, a disconnect, and that feeling of being loved, of being embraced, was gone. Somehow the test of manhood, men told me, was the willingness to accept this loss, to not speak it even in private grief. Sadly, tragically, these men in great numbers were remembering a primal moment of heartbreak and heartache, the moment that they were compelled to give up their right to feel, to love, in order to take their place as patriarchal men. Everyone who tries to create love with an emotionally unaware partner suffers. Self-help books galore tell us that we cannot change anyone but ourselves. Of course, they never answer the question of what will motivate males in a patriarchal culture who have been taught that to love emasculates them to choose love, when the choice means that they must stand against patriarchy, against the tyranny of the familiar. We cannot change men, but we can encourage, implore, and affirm their will to change. We can respect the truth of their inner being, a truth that they may be unable to speak, that they long to connect, to love, and to be loved. The will to change. Oh, I muted. My arm hit the mute button. When did that happen? Thanks for letting me know. The will to change, men, masculinity, and love answers the questions about love asked by men of all ages in our culture. I write in response. I write in response to questions about love asked me by the men I know most intimately who are still working to find their way back to the open-hearted, emotionally expressive selves they once were before they were told to silence their longings and close their hearts. The will to change is the offering I bring to the feast of male reclamation and recovery of self, of their emotional right to love and be loved. Women have believed that we could save the men in our lives by giving them love, that this love would serve as the cure for all the wounds inflicted by toxic assaults on their emotional systems, by the emotional heart attacks they undergo every day. Women can share in this healing process. We can guide, instruct, observe, share information and skills, but we cannot do for boys and men what they must do for themselves. Our love helps, but it alone does not save boys or men. Ultimately, boys and men save themselves when they learn the art of loving. End of the chapter. Take a drink. Look at the chat. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for trying to sort me out there. The increasing amounts. All right. Chapter 2. Understanding patriarchy. Yeah! Patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. I like that. I like that sentence. Let's do it twice. Rewind. Air horns. Animated emotes in the chat. Touching you. Nah. All right. Patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. Yet most men do not use the word patriarchy in everyday life. Most men never think about patriarchy, what it means, how it is created and sustained. Many men in our nation would not be able to spell the word or pronounce it correctly. Shots fired. The word patriarchy just is not a part of their normal everyday thought or speech. Men who have heard and know the word usually associate it with women's liberation, with feminism, and therefore dismiss it as irrelevant to their own experience. I have been standing at podiums talking about patriarchy for more than 30 years. It is a word I use daily, and men who hear me use it often ask me what I mean by it. Nothing discounts the old anti-feminist projection of men as all-powerful more than their basic ignorance of a major facet of the political system that shapes and informs male identity and sense of self from birth until death. I often use the phrase imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy to describe the interlocking political systems that are the foundations of our nation's politics. Of these systems, the one that we all learn the most about growing up is the system of patriarchy, even if we never know the word, because patriarchal gender roles are assigned to us as children, and we are given continual guidance about the ways we can best fulfill these roles. Patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. When my older brother and I were born, with a year separating us in age, patriarchy determined how we would each be regarded by our parents. Both our parents believed in patriarchy. They had been taught patriarchal thinking through religion. At church, they had learned that God created man to rule the world and everything in it, and that it was the work of women to help men perform these tasks, to obey and to always assume a subordinate role in relation to a powerful man. They were taught that God was male. These teachings were reinforced in every institution they encountered: schools, courthouses, clubs, sports arenas, as well as churches. Embracing patriarchal thinking, like everyone else around them, they taught it to their children because it seemed like a natural way, quote unquote, natural way to organize life. As their daughter, I was taught that it was my role to serve, to be weak, to be free from the burden of thinking, to caretake and nurture others. My brother was taught that it was his role to be served, to provide, to be strong, to think, strategize, and plan, and to refuse to caretake or nurture others. I was taught that it was not proper for a female to be violent, that it was, quote, unnatural. My brother was taught that his value would be determined by his will to do violence, albeit in appropriate settings. He was taught that for a boy, enjoying violence was a good thing, quote, albeit in appropriate settings. He was taught that a boy should not express feelings. I was taught that girls could and should express feelings, or at least some of them. When I responded with rage at being denied a toy, I was taught as a girl in a patriarchal household that rage was not an appropriate feminine feeling, that it should be not only not expressed, but be eradicated. When my brother responded with rage at being denied a toy, he was taught as a boy in a patriarchal household that his ability to express rage was good, but that he had to learn the best setting to unleash his hostility. It was not good for him to use his rage to oppose the wishes of his parents. But later, when he grew up, he was taught that rage was permitted, and that allowing rage to provoke him to violence would help him protect home and nation. We lived in farm country, isolated from other people. Our sense of gender roles was learned from our parents, from the ways we saw them behave. My brother and I remember our confusion about gender. In reality, I was stronger and more violent than my brother, which we learned quickly was bad. And he was a gentle, peaceful boy, which we learned was really bad. Although we were often confused, we knew one fact for certain: we could not be and act the way we wanted to, doing what we felt like. It was clear to us that our behavior had to follow a predetermined gendered script. We both learned the word patriarchy in our adult life when we learned that the script that had determined what we should be, the identities we should make. Willow, what's up? Was based on patriarchal values and beliefs about gender. I was always more interested in challenging patriarchy than my brother was because it was the system that was always leaving me out of things that I wanted to be part of. In our family life of the 50s, marbles were a boys' game. My brother had inherited his marbles from men in the family. He had a tin box to keep them in, all sizes and shapes, marvelously colored. They were to my eye the most beautiful objects. We played together with them, often with me aggressively clinging to the marble I liked best, refusing to share. When Dad was at work, our stay at home mom was quite content to see us playing marbles together. Yet Dad, looking at our play from a patriarchal perspective, was disturbed by what he saw. His daughter, aggressive and competitive, was a better player than his son. His son was passive. The boy did not really seem to care who won and was willing to give over marbles on demand. Dad decided that this play had to end, that both my brother and I needed to learn a lesson about appropriate gender roles. One evening, my brother was given permission by Dad to bring out the tin of marbles. I announced my desire to play and was told by my brother that, quote, girls did not play with marbles, that it was a boys' game. This made no sense to my 4 or 5 year old mind, and I insisted on my right to play by picking up marbles and shooting them. Dad intervened to tell me to stop. I did not listen. His voice grew louder and louder. Then suddenly he snatched me up, broke a board from our screen door, and began to beat me with it, telling me, you're just a little girl. When I tell you to do something, I mean for you to do it. All right. We maybe should throw a content warning up here for domestic violence. And let's just do a general content warning. It's probably about that time. I don't want to tell people stories they're not ready to hear. Content notification, man. Domestic violence, male violence, assault. We'll leave it here for now. Pin it up. There it goes. He beat me and he beat me, wanting me to acknowledge that I understood what I had done. His rage, his violence captured everyone's attention. Our family sat spellbound, wrapped before the pornography of patriarchal violence. After this beating, I was banished, forced to stay alone in the dark. Mama came into the bedroom to soothe the pain, telling me in her soft southern voice, I tried to warn you, you need to accept that you are just a little girl and girls can't do what boys do. In service to patriarchy, her task was to reinforce that Dad had done the right thing by putting me in my place, by restoring the natural social order. I remember this traumatic event so well because it was a story told again and again within our family. No one cared that the constant retelling might trigger post-traumatic stress. The retelling was necessary to reinforce both the message and the remembered state of absolute powerlessness. The recollection of this brutal whipping of a little girl daughter by a big, strong man served as more than just a reminder to me of my gendered place. It was a reminder to everyone watching and remembering, to all my siblings, male and female, and to our grown woman mother that our patriarchal father was the ruler in our household. We were to remember that if we did not obey his rules, we would be punished even unto death. This is the way we were experientially schooled in the art of patriarchy. There is nothing unique or even exceptional about this experience. Listen to the voices of wounded, grown children raised in patriarchal homes, and you will hear different versions with the same underlying theme. The use of violence. Hello, Sparkle. The use of violence to reinforce our indoctrination and acceptance of patriarchy. In the book, How Can I Get Through to You? Family therapist Terrence Real tells how his sons were initiated into patriarchal thinking even as their parents worked to create a loving home in which anti-patriarchal values prevailed. He tells of how his young son Alexander enjoyed dressing as Barbie until boys playing with his older brother witnessed his Barbie persona and let him know by their gaze and their shocked, disapproving silence that his behavior was unacceptable. From the book, without a shred of malevolence, the stare my son received transmitted a message. You are not to do this. And the medium that message was broadcast in was a potent emotion, shame. At 3, Alexander was learning the rules. A 10-second wordless transaction was powerful enough to dissuade my son from that instant forward from what had been his favorite activity. I call such moments of induction the, quote, normal traumatization of boys. The normal traumatization of boys. To indoctrinate boys into the rules of patriarchy, we force them to feel pain and to deny their feelings. My stories took place in the 50s. The stories Real tells are recent. They all underscore the tyranny of patriarchal thinking, the power of patriarchal culture to hold us captive. Real is one of the most enlightened thinkers on the subject of patriarchal masculinity in our nation, and yet he lets readers know that he is not able to keep his boys out of patriarchy's reach. They suffer its assaults, as do all boys and girls, to a greater or lesser degree, no doubt by creating a loving home that is not patriarchal. Real at least offers his boys a choice. They can choose to be themselves, or they can choose conformity with patriarchal roles. Real uses the phrase, quote, psychological patriarchy to describe the patriarchal thinking common to females and males. Despite the contemporary visionary feminist thinking that makes clear that a patriarchal thinker need not be a male, most folks continue to see men as the problem of patriarchy. This is simply not the case. Women can be as wedded to patriarchal thinking and action as men. I remember reading that sentence for the first time and like a light bulb going off in my head. And suddenly thinking about all the patriarchal women I've known and know. And some of the loudest patriarchal voices in my life have certainly been women. Um, and I feel that's an important thing. So I'm going to talk. Women can be as wedded to a patriarchal thinking and action as men. Psychotherapist John Bradshaw's clear-sighted definition of patriarchy in Creating Love is a useful one. Quote, the dictionary defines patriarchy as, quote, a social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family in both domestic and religious functions. Patriarchy is characterized by male domination and power. He states further that, quote, patriarchal rules still govern most of the world's religious, school systems, and family systems. Describing the most damaging of these rules, Bradshaw lists, quote, blind obedience, the foundation upon which patriarchy stands, the repression of all emotions except fear, the destruction of individual willpower, and the repression of thinking whenever it departs from the authority figure's way of thinking. Patriarchal thinking shapes the values of our culture. We are socialized into this system, females as well as males. Most of us learned patriarchal attitudes in our family of origin, and they were usually taught to us by our mothers. These attitudes were reinforced in schools and religious institutions. The contemporary presence of female-headed households has led many people to assume that children in these households are not learning patriarchal values because no male is present. They assume that men are the sole teachers of patriarchal thinking. Yet many female-headed households endorse and promote patriarchal thinking with far greater passion than two-parent households. I have found this to be true also in my personal life. Sorry. Hi, Demella. Hi, Mom. What's up, Black Widow? Um, Keep losing my place because I look at the chat. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't chat. I'm just curious what you're saying. Here's a first-time chatter. Missed a bit of the stream. Trying not to burn your doll. What's the title of the book? The title of the book is The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks. All right, back we go. Yet many female-headed households endorse and promote patriarchal thinking with far greater passion than two-parent households. Because they do not have an experiential reality to challenge false fantasies of gender roles, women in such households are far more likely to idealize the patriarchal male role and patriarchal men than are women who live with patriarchal men every day. We need to highlight the role women play in perpetuating and sustaining patriarchal culture so that we will recognize patriarchy as a system women and men support equally, even if men receive more rewards from that system. Dismantling and changing patriarchal culture is work that men and women must do together. Clearly, we cannot dismantle a system as long as we engage... Hold up. Too much water, too much protein. Clearly, we cannot dismantle a system as long as we engage in collective denial about its impact on our lives. Patriarchy requires male dominance by any means necessary. Hence, it supports, promotes, and condones sexist violence. We hear the most about sexist violence in public discourses about rape and abuse by domestic partners. But the most common forms of patriarchal violence are those that take place in the home between patriarchal parents and children. The point of such violence is usually to reinforce a dominator model in which the authority figure is deemed ruler over those without power and given the right to maintain that rule through practices of subjugation, subordination, and submission. Keeping males and females from telling the truth about what happens to them in families is one way patriarchal culture is maintained. A great majority of individuals enforce an unspoken rule in the culture as a whole that demands we keep the secrets of patriarchy, thereby protecting the rule of the father. Ah, Cherry. Hugs, Cherry. Um, this rule of silence is upheld when the culture refuses everyone easy access even to the word patriarchy. Most children do not learn what to call this system of institutionalized gender roles, so rarely do we name it in everyday speech. This silence promotes denial. And how can we organize to challenge and change a system that cannot be named? It is no accident that feminists began to use the word patriarchy to replace the more commonly used male chauvinism or and quote sexism. These courageous voices wanted men and women to become more aware of the way patriarchy affects us all. In popular culture, the word itself was hardly used during the heyday of contemporary feminism. Anti male activists were no more eager than their sexist male counterparts to emphasize the system of patriarchy and the way it works. For to do so would have automatically exposed the notion that men were all powerful and women powerless, that all men were oppressive and women always and only victims. By placing the blame for the per- sorry, by placing the blame for the perpetuation of sexism solely on men, these women could maintain their own allegiance to patriarchy, their own lust for power. They masked their longing to be dominators by taking on the mantle of victimhood. Like many visionary radical feminists, I challenged the misguided notion put forward by women who were simply fed up with male exploitation and oppression that men were, quote, the enemy. As early as 1984, I included a chapter with the title, quote, Men, Comrades in Struggle in my book, Feminist Theory From Margin to Center, urging advocates of feminist politics to challenge any rhetoric which placed the sole blame for perpetuating patriarchy and male domination onto men. Here's a section from that book. Separatist ideology encourages women to ignore the negative impact on sexism on male personhood. It stresses polarization between the sexes. According to Joy Justice, separatists believe that there are, quote, two basic perspectives on the issue of naming the victims of sexism. There is the perspective that men oppress women, and there is the perspective that people are people, and we are all hurt by rigid sex roles. Both perspectives accurately describe our predicament. Men do oppress women. People are hurt by rigid sexist role patterns. These two realities coexist. Male oppression of women cannot be excused by the recognition that there are ways men are hurt by rigid sexist roles. Feminist activists should acknowledge that hurt and work to change it. It exists. It does not erase or lessen male responsibility for supporting and perpetuating their power under patriarchy to exploit and oppress women in a manner far more grievous than the serious psychological stress and emotional pain caused by male conformity to rigid sexist role patterns. Throughout this essay, I stress that feminist advocates collude in the pain of men wounded by patriarchy when they falsely represent men as always and only powerful, as always and only gaining privileges from their blind obedience to patriarchy. I emphasize that patriarchal ideology brainwashes men to believe that their domination of women is beneficial when it is not. From that book, often feminist activists affirm this logic when we should be constantly naming these acts as expressions of perverted power relations, general lack of control of one's actions, emotional powerlessness, extreme irrationality, and in many cases, outright insanity. Passive male absorption of sexist ideology enables men to falsely interpret this disturbed behavior positively. As long as men are brainwashed to equate violent domination and abuse of women with privilege, they will have no understanding of the damage done to themselves or to others and no motivation to change. Patriarchy demands of men that they become and remain emotional cripples. Since it is a system that denies men full access to their freedom of will, it is difficult for any man of any class to rebel against patriarchy, to be disloyal to the patriarchal parent, be that parent female or male. The man who has been my primary bond for more than 12 years was traumatized by the patriarchal dynamics in his family of origin. When I met him, he was in his 20s. While his formative years had been spent in the company of a violent alcoholic dad, his circumstances changed when he was 12 and he began to live alone with his mother. In the early years of our relationship, he talked openly about his hostility and rage toward his abusing dad. He was not interested in forgiving him or understanding the circumstances that had shaped and influenced his dad's life, either in his childhood or in his working life as a military man. In the early years of our relationship, he was extremely critical of male domination of women and children. Although he did not use the word patriarchy, he understood its meaning and he opposed it. His gentle, quiet manner often led folks to ignore him, counting him among the weak and the powerless. By the age of 30, he began to assume a more macho persona, embracing the dominator model that he had once critiqued. Donning the mantle of patriarch, he gained greater respect and visibility. More women were drawn to him. He was noticed more in public spheres. His criticism of male domination ceased, and indeed he began to mouth patriarchal rhetoric, saying the kind of sexist stuff that would have appalled him in the past. These changes in his thinking and behavior were triggered by his desire to be accepted and affirmed in a patriarchal workplace and rationalized by his desire to get ahead. His story is not unusual. Boys brutalized and victimized by patriarchy more often than not become patriarchal, embodying the abusive patriarchal masculinity that they once clearly recognized as evil. Few men brutally abused as boys in the name of patriarchal maleness courageously resist the brainwashing and remain true to themselves. Most males conform to patriarchy in one way or another. Indeed, radical feminist critique of patriarchy has practically been silenced in our culture. It has become a subcultural discourse available only to well-educated elites. What's up, Ono? Free and 15? Word up. I'll probably get to this chapter then. Get to the end of this chapter. Welcome home. Talking about rigid sex roles. Even in those circles, using the word patriarchy is regarded as passé. Often in my lectures, when I use the phrase, quote, imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy to describe our nation's political system, audiences laugh. No one has ever explained why accurately naming this system is funny. The laughter is itself a weapon of patriarchal terrorism. It functions as a disclaimer, discounting the significance of what is being named. It suggests that the words themselves are problematic and not the system they describe. I interpret this laughter as the audience's way of showing discomfort with being asked to ally themselves with an anti-patriarchal disobedient critique. This laughter reminds me that if I dare to challenge patriarchy openly, I risk not being taken seriously. Citizens in this nation fear challenging patriarchy even as they lack overt awareness that they are fearful. So deeply embedded in our collective unconscious are the rules of patriarchy. I often tell audiences that if we were to go door to door asking if we should end male violence against women, most people would give their unequivocal support. Then if you told them, we can only stop male violence against women by ending male domination, by eradicating patriarchy, they would begin to hesitate, to change their position. Despite the many gains of contemporary feminist movement, greater equality for women in the workforce, more tolerance for the relinquishing of rigid gender roles, patriarchy as a system remains intact, and many people continue to believe that it is needed if humans are to survive as a species. This belief seems ironic, given that patriarchal methods of organizing nations, especially the insistence on violence as a means of social control, has actually led to the slaughter of millions of people on the planet. Until we can collectively acknowledge the damage patriarchy causes and the suffering it creates, we cannot address male pain. We cannot demand for men the right to be whole, to be givers and sustainers of life. Obviously, some patriarchal men are reliable and even benevolent caretakers and providers, but still they are imprisoned by a system that undermines their mental health. Patriarchy promotes insanity. It is at the root of the psychological ills troubling men in our nation. Nevertheless, there is no mass concern for the plight of men. In Stiffed, The Betrayal of the American Man, Susan Faludi includes very little discussion of patriarchy. From that book, ask feminists to diagnose men's problems, and you will often get a very clear explanation. Men are in crisis because women are properly challenging male dominance. Women are asking men to share the public reins, and men can't bear it. Ask anti-feminists, and you will get a diagnosis that is, in one respect, similar. Men are troubled, many conservative pundits say, because women have gone far beyond their demands for equal treatment and are now trying to take power and control away from men. The underlying message, men cannot be men, only eunuchs, if they are not in control. Both the feminist and anti-feminist views are rooted in a peculiarly modern American perception that to be a man means to be at the controls and at all times feel yourself in control. Faludi never interrogates the notion of control. She never considers that the notion that men were somehow in control, in power, and satisfied with their lives before contemporary feminist movements is false. Patriarchy as a system has denied males access to full emotional well-being, which is not the same as feeling rewarded, successful, or powerful because of one's capacity to assert control over others. To truly address male pain and male crisis, we must as a nation be willing to expose the harsh reality that patriarchy has damaged men in the past and continues to damage them in the present. If patriarchy were truly rewarding to men, the violence and addiction in family life that is so all-pervasive would not exist. This violence was not created by feminism. If patriarchy were rewarding the overwhelming dissatisfaction most men feel in their work lives, a dissatisfaction extensively documented in the works of Studs Terkel and echoed in Faluti's treatise, would not exist. In many ways, Stift was yet another betrayal of American men because Faluti spends so much time trying not to challenge patriarchy that she fails to highlight the necessity of ending patriarchy if we are to liberate men. Rather, she writes, instead of wondering why men resist women's struggle for a freer and healthier life, I began to wonder why men refrain from engaging in their own struggle. Why, despite a crescendo of random tantrums, they have offered no methodical, reasoned response to their predicament. Given the untenable and insulting nature of the demands placed on men to prove themselves in our culture, why don't men revolt? Why haven't men responded to the series of betrayals in their own lives, to the failure... Were you calling for the incel movement, Faluti? Why haven't men responded to the series of betrayals in their own lives, to the failures of their fathers to make good on their promises, with something co-equal to feminism? Note that Faluti does not dare risk either the ire of feminist females by suggesting that men can find salvation in feminist movement, or rejection by potential male readers who are solidly anti-feminist by suggesting that they have something to gain from engaging feminism. So far, in our nation, visionary feminist movement is the only struggle for justice that emphasizes the need to end patriarchy. No mass body of women has challenged patriarchy, and neither has any group of men come together to lead the struggle. The crisis facing men is not the crisis of masculinity. It is the crisis of patriarchal masculinity. Until we make this distinction clear, men will continue to fear that any critique of patriarchy represents a threat. Distinguishing political patriarchy, which he sees as largely committed to ending sexism, therapist Terence Real makes clear that the patriarchy damaging us all is embedded in our psyches. From the book, psychological patriarchy is the dynamic between those qualities deemed masculine and feminine, quote, in quotes, in which half our human traits are exalted while the other half is devalued. Both men and women participate in this tortured value system. Psychological patriarchy is a dance of contempt, quote, unquote, a perverse form of connection that replaces true intimacy with complex, covert layers of dominance and submission, collusion and manipulation. It is the unacknowledged paradigm of relationships that has suffused Western civilization generation after generation, deforming both sexes and destroying the passionate bond between them. By highlighting psychological patriarchy, we see that everyone is implicated, and we are freed from the misperception that men are the enemy. To end patriarchy, we must challenge both its psychological and its concrete manifestations in daily life. There are folks who are able to critique patriarchy while unable to act in an anti-patriarchal manner. To end male pain, to respond effectively to male crisis, we have to name the problem. We have to both acknowledge that the problem is patriarchy and work to end patriarchy. Terence Real offers this valuable insight. Quote, the reclamation of wholeness is a process even more fraught for men than it has been for women, more difficult and more profoundly threatening to the culture at large. If men are to reclaim the essential goodness of male being, if they are to regain the space of open-heartedness and emotional expressiveness that is the foundation of well-being, we must envision alternatives to patriarchal masculinity. We must all change. There it is. That's chapter 2. Next chapter is called Being a Boy. And we might leave it there if Ono's ready to chop it up.